Hello, good evening. Welcome, guys. Jenny, I think, will be here shortly. This is TransParents, and this evening we have a special guest with us, Katie Jenifer. My pronouns are she, her. You can find me on TikTok at Moonchild77. We had hoped to go live there this week, and we didn't. I'm hoping to have StreamYard set up next week so that we will officially be live there on Sunday nights as well. So let me introduce Katie, our special guest tonight. She is a trailblazing legal advocate dedicated to fighting for the rights of trans and gender diverse youth. As an attorney with Legal Aid of North Carolina, she works on the Child Advocate Project, providing crucial support and representation for vulnerable youth. Katie also serves as the policy director of NC Equality, where she shapes policies that promote equality and justice for the LGBT community in North Carolina. Recently spotlighted in Newsweek, Katie's impactful insights on the Skrmetti case highlights her unwavering commitment to ensuring the transgender minors have access to essential health care. Her advocacy extends beyond the courtroom, and she tirelessly works to create inclusive and supportive environments for all individuals. So thank you, Katie, so much for coming on this evening. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you for having me, Amber.
Not a problem. I think one of the first pieces, I think, just in case, and I did provide in comments for anybody watching, if you look in the comments, I do have the link for Katie's article that she, talked about her opinions of what the Skrmetti case were. And I did put in there also the oral argument so that if you didn't get a chance to hear that on the Supreme case when it was argued on December 5th, you can hear. But I guess the first part is let's talk about your personal journey and why you became a lawyer in the first place, because I think this kind of speaks more to you as an individual.
Yeah, so I started on this journey, I guess it's been about 13 years ago when my child first was able to verbally express who she is and her gender identity. And my spouse and I just, at that time, were trying to find resources. We lived in a different county than we live in now that didn't have as many resources for LGBTQ community members, let alone young children who were expressing anything about gender identity. We found a therapist who was willing to work with us and learn with us. And after 2 years of therapy, that therapist sat us down and said, "Look, your child has been insistent, consistent, and persistent as to who she is." And so at that point, we underwent the pieces of a social transition. So, changing hair, clothing, name, pronouns, those kind of things. It had an immediate change in our child's demeanor in terms of, she had been very depressed, very sullen, very just sort of like would hide, not
Shut
interested in
down.
leaving not interested in leaving the house, that kind of thing. And then after we took the steps for the social transition, we had a totally different child, very happy, very gregarious, very outgoing, very excited to get out of the house and live life. And so we knew we were on the right path, and we just followed what has been scientifically studied um,
Great.
you know, uh, guidelines for raising a trans kid. And then in our state, in North Carolina, in 2017, we passed House Bill 2, which was known as the bathroom bill. And around that, the year before, I had been thinking about, just due to several things that had happened in our lives, from a local news station outing our child at the pickup line in elementary school, to her being denied the ability to play Parks and Rec softball for children 8 years old and younger, based on their policy of following the gender marker on your birth certificate at the time, to just discrimination in medical practices and those kind of things. So we had been talking about me going back to school to become a legal advocate for her, because felt like my spouse is a nurse, so felt like we had her medical piece covered. And
Right.
so after HB2, that same year, I entered law school, to become a legal advocate for my daughter. I joke now, that the joke was on me because, our General Assembly has made laws saying they know how to parent my child better than I do, that even being a lawyer, I can't do anything about.
Right.
So yeah, so I try to use my law degree as a way to help other community members, other families like ours, and do a lot of name and gender marker correction work, as well as my paying jobs. Yeah, so
Right.
that's
Well, I
kind of
mean, and I
how we are
think
now.
that was one of the first ways that I met you. I think because I know I had gone to like UNC had a gender and sexuality summit last year. I think Duke had one.
Mhm.
And then we even had like the emergency town council when I think North Carolina was trying to present some bills in the General Assembly last year. That there
Right.
were some emergency town meetings that we also were that I had met you through some of those meetings. And I just kind of kept following your story as you went. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, I see that. Because in a way that was kind of, I knew I wanted to be a health advocate and I had wanted to be a nurse first, and I was in nursing school, and then I became a health advocate. And then once I got out of school, it kind of became real apparent. I started really thinking about once he came out, was I ever taught how to uphold his bodily autonomy? Did we ever talk about how you uphold his rights within PEDS, within mental health, within maternal health? Were any of these things being discussed? And they weren't. And I suddenly realized, and I was listening to stories of people on LinkedIn who
Mhm.
were in the trans community and their different experiences of going into inpatient care in our local hospitals. And I kept thinking, if this is my kid, if when he goes in, if he needs to go in for any kind of care, what kind of treatment is he going to get? And that just kind of brought me back to school and this realization that it wasn't in the education, so it wasn't in the textbooks. It wasn't being taught within the program. So how are those healthcare professionals supposed to uphold someone's autonomy if they haven't been taught how to uphold their autonomy? They're not.
Mhm.
They bring in their bias and their discrimination instead. And that kind of then framed my work. It pivoted from women's maternal health, which I had always been passionate about, immediately over to trans rights. And this is the same thing. This is about you being able to make that choice for what's best for your body with your doctor. And it was still about bodily autonomy. It was just here was another group that was being marginalized even more so. So it changed my trajectory in my career, kind of like yours, and seeing, oh, this is what my child needs, and it's not there. So therefore, I have to create it.
Right.
And that's kind of it's uncanny to me that as parents, we have to take on the role as an advocate to now fight the state, to fight the federal government, and to say, hey, our kid was born here. We have rights just like everybody else. Why is it
Mhm.
okay suddenly that they can't have care? Um, and I guess because I know you wrote your article about Skrmetti and how that would impact. I guess what do you think are some of what do you think is going to happen? What are your current thinkings along that line, and from what you heard from oral arguments?
Yeah, I always hesitate to predict for the Supreme Court, so I don't really know. I mean, we're all worried because it's a conservative court right now, and
Yep.
just based on the oral arguments and the questions, I mean, it was very clear the line of questioning from certain justices seemed to be geared towards a certain response. I
Right.
mean, I just thank God for Ketanji, Brown Jackson. I mean, like we thank God she's on the court. Like her questions were so great.
I love her. I love
Yeah,
her. It's just like just give her the microphone.
yeah, yeah. But I don't know what'll happen. The interesting thing about the Skrmetti case is in the case itself from Tennessee that there were two really constitutional pieces brought up. So one was what they argued about it being a 14th Amendment equal protection argument. That was
Right.
what was argued in the oral arguments. The second piece that they didn't bring, or the Supreme Court didn't want argued, was the piece about fundamental rights of parents. So in the U.S., there's a fundamental right of parents to raise our children as we see fit. This has been played out in the courts for decades. Everything from Amish people not having to send their kids to public schools to, like you name it. There's been lots of different cases brought, and it's always been upheld that parents have a fundamental right to raise their children as they see
Right.
fit. They did not want to address that question or that piece. So that's still out there. And so it could come back, something along these lines. I think there's 24, 26 states now that have bans similar to this. So
Yes.
there's many, including North Carolina, and there's many court cases, including North Carolina, that are still out there working through the system. So, this won't be the last case that could potentially hit the Supreme Court. So that parental rights piece could get brought at some point. This was
Brought
really
forward.
only, this argument was really only the 14th Amendment. So what it's saying is this is a Tennessee case. So in Tennessee, trans youth cannot have access to puberty pausing medication or any like hormone replacement therapy, anything like that, surgeries, which don't typically happen anyway for minors,
Right.
anything like that. But cisgender youth still have access to all of that, including surgeries, because the
Right.
number one youth category that receives what we call top surgery are cis boys.
Males. Hmm.
Right. Yeah. So they all still have access to everything, including surgery, and their surgery is not a controversy.
Right.
Cis children going through early puberty and getting puberty pausing medication is not under controversy, and it's been used for at least 4 decades with no problems.
Right.
It literally just
Right.
pauses puberty. As soon as you come off it, everything goes back. And people use hormone replacement therapy all the time. Adults and youth use that all the time, cis people.
Right.
So the
Right.
argument is that this is sex-based discrimination based on the fact that these kids are trans, because all other kids can still access it. And that was the
Right.
crux of this argument.
And I really felt like they have a case in that, because I don't know how you can argue that this 14-year-old can have a nose job, this
Mhm.
17-year-old can have breast reduction, that
Mhm.
they can have, or hormone blockers or whatever, that they can have access, and yet this one tiny little population, and when we say tiny, we're talking about less than 2% population of the entire
Mhm.
US, can have access to needed health care,
Mhm.
to necessary health care. And in fact, they're doing it and then they want to argue that it's on the basis of upholding the child's health, when we know that it's
Mhm.
going to be a detriment to their mental health, just for starters.
Mhm.
So I kind of it I don't it's really hard for me when the justices go, we're trying to do what's best for kids. Really?
Right.
That's not what the data says. That's not what
Mhm.
every major medical association says.
Mhm. Major
And
medical and mental health. Mhm.
right, every
Mhm.
single one of them. This is what they all back. This is WPATH. This is why
Right.
we have created these standards of care that say this is what's best for this patient.
Mhm.
And if every other person is able to make those decisions, if I'm able to make those for all the rest of my minor children,
Mhm.
just because one identifies a different way, why do they not get health care?
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize some of the main arguments that the opposition makes on this. So there's a lot of myths and disinformation out there about what gender affirming care is. And so some of the myths and disinformation is like, okay, well, this sterilizes children, so it has to be bad. What about kids who change their mind? They're too young to make a decision like this. And that there's health risks, to this healthcare. And there's responses to all of those things. Trans children who receive even just one, even if they have just one positive adult in their life, their risk of suicide goes down to the national average for youth their age. And then to have a supportive family, uh, you know, they're going to be the same risk for mental health stuff as the regular as the cis population, not regular cis population.
Right.
So And then when talking about kids changing their mind and things, the thing that I don't understand there is, to me, gender being more fluid, and us recognizing that in the last decade or so, to me is a very freeing thing. I don't it boggles my mind as to why that's so scary, because to me that's very freeing. That you mean I don't have to
Right.
be pigeonholed into this like identity of what feminine means. I can be whatever I want to be. Like, that's really cool. And I just was speaking at UNC's School of Medicine on Friday, and I said this same thing. Like, I hope everybody changes multiple times over their lives in every aspect of their life. I hope you're not the same person you are at 30 that you were at 12, and at 40 than you were at 30. And I hope you have grown and developed, and things change. And I think that's wonderful. To me, that's not a scary thing. That's not a reason to withhold medically necessary care for somebody. And if my daughter,
Right.
who has stayed insistent, consistent, and persistent now for 14, 12, 13, 14 years, if she tomorrow came to me and said, "Hey mom, I think my gender identity is changing and is this," I'm not going to be like, "Oh no, everything's ruined." I'm going to be like, "Okay, what do we need to do to support you? What do you need?" And
Right.
we will confer with her doctors and her mental health providers, and we'll come up with a plan like we always have. And it's not this tragic thing. It's not a thing to withhold health care.
Right.
And then the mis and disinformation about the care making permanent changes for our kids. What I want to say to folks is, going through natal puberty for a trans kid makes permanent changes to their body, some
Yep.
of which will be life threatening to them, to their mental health, and some will not come out on the other side. And so if you have healthcare, if you have science backed healthcare that is going to prevent that child from not coming out on the other side, then that seems like a no-brainer to me. Then we provide the child with the healthcare, the science-backed healthcare that's been around for decades, and
Right.
use safely. My daughter's been using her medically necessary care for let's see, 6 years successfully, without any negative side effects at all. She's living her best 17-year-old life now because of that. And
Right.
she has shared with me on multiple occasions that she doesn't think she would still be here had she not had access to that care. So when those are your choices and that's your option, I don't see what the moral crisis is. Aren't we supposed to protect our children
Right.
and provide
And
them
listen to them.
care?
I mean, we're
Yeah.
supposed to listen to them. And I don't know if you can see the comments that are going in the comment section, but I'll just say that those are on YouTube, and I can shut those off when we're done and block those people, and y'all can keep saying what you want. Um, that's not the normal comments we get from our LinkedIn community, and that's okay. I will say that for the spouting that they're doing, that trans is new since 2014, it's not. Trans people date back to the Copper Age. Like, we have written records that go back 3,000 years. So, Donald Bravo and Televised Apocalypse, you can both go on wherever you want with this crap that you're spilling in my comment section. It's not mutilation, it is supporting your children. And if you want to shove your kid into a gender that doesn't match them, that's your prerogative, but you're hurting your kids.
Yeah, and there's been written documentation that trans people have existed throughout time, throughout every ethnic and um, world culture. It's not new.
Yep.
I will say something that might help people think about this too is, at one point in our world, it was illegal to be left-handed, and it was thought to be
Yep.
demonic. It was like a religious atrocity to be left-handed. In schools, children were punished, physically punished, for being left-handed. They either had their left hand tied behind their back or they were hit on their left hand. And when we realized that being left-handed was not demonic, was not a medical problem or a mental health problem, it just some people were left-handed, the number of left-handed people skyrocketed because it was no
Right.
longer illegal to be left-handed. And so if you think about it in terms of trans youth, and parents, I hope all parents, as we know better, we do better. And when as parents collectively became aware that, okay, being LGBTQ is not this moral failing for my child. This is, people are born LGBTQ, and it's my job as a parent to support the child that I have. And when we came to that realization, the number of LGBTQ children went up because it was now safe, or safer,
Right.
at least at home, to say, and to say I am LGBTQ, just like it was then
Come
safe for
out.
people to say, hey, I am left-handed too, and I've hidden it all this time because of the world that I lived in, and now it's safe. And so when you think about it that way, it's really not, there's not this social contagion or anything else. And again, I go back to how freeing to have our children raised in a world where you think, when you say you can be anything you want to be, and like if you want to wear suits and a tie, right now, and then
Do it.
you want to wear dresses tomorrow, like that's really cool. That, like, I think that's cool. Like, let kids express all those different things.
They are.
Mhm.
I mean, that's and they're trying to throw out about a lot of biblical and God makes us, if y'all want to go there, I'll just say that God makes us each the way we're supposed to be made. And if my kid is trans, God chose that. If that's where you want to go with it, God chose that.
Yeah, and I'll say
Um,
too, at the time when my child socially transitioned, I worked full time for a church, and my spouse worked part time for a church and full time at another job. And I will say too, at the time, like this again, this was more than a decade ago. Like that wasn't really an argument brought up to me, and our church family was very supportive. And
right,
what most people shared with me at the time, and what I thought myself is, God doesn't make mistakes, and my child's not a mistake. And I think God uses children like my child to show
just
people the love that Jesus came to say, that we're supposed to love our neighbors, and love our neighbors the way that we, or treat our neighbors the way that
want
we want to be treated, and love God the most, and then love other people second. And so I think that's a wonderful thing if people are spiritual, that your spiritual entity created trans kids, intersex kids, LGBTQ kids, just like any other kid, and that maybe this is your opportunity. Maybe God is speaking to you to say, this is how I want you to live out the tenets that I have presented to you, to love your neighbors,
right,
love God and love your neighbors. And that includes all neighbors. God didn't cherry pick
exclude,
which neighbors what we're supposed to love. It's all people.
right, include them all, bring them all in.
Mhm,
Um, and I do think people do kind of get lost with that. I think our children become teaching tools for us.
mhm,
They always were for me. Like I'll say that I think some of my greatest lessons I have learned were things that about myself that my children would kind of hold up the mirror and be like, do you really feel this way? Is this how you truly feel, mom? And it'd be like, oh, oh, no, no, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Thank you for pointing it out to
mhm,
me because I
mhm,
think they are very good teachers for us to learn on because as adults we kind of get closed off. We
mhm,
don't imagine the way we used to. We aren't as willing to listen and to accept and to understand as we are when we're children. And we're very empathetic. I think as we get older, we kind of lose some of that. And it's hard. And I think my child was a very good tool in reminding me that we're all different.
mhm,
And we should all be accepted for those differences. And
mhm,
yes, there are going to be people out there who don't like it, and I see them. Um, but that doesn't exclude my child from the fact that they have every right to exist. They do exist. I
mhm.
love them fully and I applaud their life. Like, do what you want to do. I
Yeah.
honestly feel that way about everybody. You
Mhm.
live the life the way you choose.
Right.
If I
Yeah.
choose to live the way my life and that doesn't impact you, I don't know why you have an opinion about it.
Mhm. Yeah. And when we've gone through this journey with my daughter, the problems that I have, or any kind of anxiety or any kind of negative emotion I have out of the process or out of our journey has never been about who my daughter is. It's how other people will treat her, and
Yep.
the potential for violence, and the potential for people to discriminate against her. And the violent piece is really the thing that concerns me the most, especially as she gets older. And
Right.
then in 2016, in the election and everything, I saw a dramatic change in the discourse. And then we've seen since then, every year, 500 plus bills are introduced across the country. Like, it's become this polarizing topic, whereas in, 5-10 years ago, we were not even on anybody's radar. And just wanting people to recognize this was an intentional thing to make trans people a polarizing thing to sway the politics of a nation. And so while you're arguing about the one trans girl in your state who wants to play badminton, you have 40% of the kids in your school who can't afford to have breakfast, or who are,
Right.
you have a much larger number. In North Carolina, it was in the tens of thousands of students who were unhoused, or
Right.
we had counties who had student lunch debt of over, close to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And like, why aren't we addressing these? Are like issues that impact all of our kids.
Major issues,
Yeah,
right?
these,
And we
why.
don't, we want to
Yeah.
cherry pick on this little issue. Jenny and I
Mhm.
talked about that a lot last year because it was
Mhm.
like, okay, so suddenly, something that affects less than 2% of the population has created the most bills that have ever been created on one single subject in the history of our Congress.
Mhm. Yeah.
2
Yeah.
years in a row,
Yeah.
and it represents less than
Mhm.
2%, like in North
Mhm.
Carolina. That
Yeah.
bill about trans females could not play female sports.
Mhm.
A, there wasn't a bill about male. It was only about females.
Mhm.
B, at the time, it only was about two, I believe it was two trans athletes who wanted to play.
Mhm.
And by the time the case was settled, they were already graduated from college.
Yeah. Yep.
It wasn't even an issue anymore. But a bill was passed on two
Mhm.
people who wanted to play a sports team
Mhm.
while they were in school or
Yeah.
college,
Yeah.
and they were denied. And
Yeah.
this ate up court for 4 years. Like, how many other things could we have actually poured attention into
Mhm.
that we
Yeah.
could have addressed, that we could
Yeah.
have solved?
Yeah.
Medicaid, the expansion of Medicaid sat out there for
Right.
how long in North Carolina for them to expand it? And then you
Mhm.
finally do, but you want to like scrutinize this one little group. It just
Mhm.
make it make sense.
Yeah. Well,
And it's something that
it's,
can make a polarize.
yeah, and that's what I, go back to. It's an intentional play. It's an intentional political play, because if we can get enough people morally outraged about this issue that really doesn't impact the majority of our state or the majority of our people, then we can distract people from being concerned about the things that do impact you. Like,
What really
you know,
happened.
people are complaining, like, I can't afford eggs. I can't afford my groceries. Groceries have gone, so wacky. I can't afford things that I used to afford. Um, why, again, like, but you're so focused on, this
Trans kids,
one these two trans kids trying to play sports, that you're going to put all your energy, you're going to show up at the General Assembly to talk about that, instead of holding our elected officials accountable and saying, what are you doing to bring prices down in our state? What are you
right?
doing to help the students who are unhoused, or, like the student lunch debt? Or what are you doing, like, that's going to impact tens of thousands of students, versus all this stuff I'm willing to
Or
leave all
one or
these
two.
I'm willing to neglect these tens of thousands of students to only focus on these two and be morally outraged. I think that really speaks to people's character, and it's part of the plan. It's part of this is a strategic plan. This is very well thought out, very well done. If you go back and look at all the states who have proposed anti-LGBT and especially anti-trans legislation, that was all written by special interests. They write
Yep.
out the bills and they hand them over to the people in your state's legislatures who they think they can get on board. And again, it's to change your focus, to focus on this thing that really doesn't affect you at all. Like, how does
No.
me providing healthcare for my child impact you? It does not. But if we can keep you focused on me and my kid, then we can keep you not focused on the things that do impact you. Not
Right.
having a living wage, housing, that you can't afford a mortgage, you can't buy a house, you can't even get an apartment. We're going to distract you from that stuff. So it's a very well done plan.
It was, and the Romans called it bread and circuses, and I can't remember the actual Latin term for it, but it was to say, hey, we're going to let you have your parties. We're going to give you some wine and some bread. And by the way, while you're not paying any attention and you're off celebrating and having your party, we're stripping you of your rights.
Hmm.
We're
Yep.
taxing you more. We're taking more of your income. We're taking your land.
Hmm.
And because everybody was so focused on, ooh, I got to have the party, I got to have the
Hmm.
party. And that's exactly what happened. We also were coming on an election year. And what gets people to the ballot box?
Hmm.
Fear.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
you gaslit and gaslit and gaslit. And gay rights, because I don't see any of you in here talking about homophobia or your gay rights. You want to talk about pronouns and trans people. So let's talk about gay rights for a minute. Let's back up 24 years ago. We started trying to expand on gay rights and the the backlash that we had in this country for 10, 15 years till we finally put it in place. And you can't go about it anymore you can't bash on trans or on gay rights anymore. Why? Because we accept it.
Hmm.
But they knew that if you pulled the trans card, ooh, we can put fear back in people again.
Hmm.
And so now
Yeah.
you have trans being attacked for that very reason, because they knew that if they stirred and they provoked fear and anger against that community, they'd get more people at the ballot box. And they did.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Fear is a motivator in politics. We've seen, and that's also, if you look historically across cultures, that's also an indicator of heading to a fascist state. And that's what a lot of advocates are concerned about now. I don't know what'll happen. I don't know if this will happen or not. I could see it happening. Um, but if we're headed that way, there'll be, there's predictions of there'll be some sort of crisis, either tanking of the economy, something like that, to where then you can establish martial law. Then you can
Yep.
restrict people's movement, restrict people's
Yep.
speech, and then head towards the government controlling more things, which is another like whole interesting another night of a podcast on how
Right.
how the Republican Party went from being the party of wanting less government involved to now being the party that is trying to insert the government
It
in
controls everything.
in every single personal decision that people make. Is really interesting to me, historically speaking. It's I have a master's degree in American Studies, so that's a different hat that I wear. But just thinking along those lines about what happened to the two-party system and how we've gotten so far in such a short time. So I don't
Right.
know what'll happen. I know that, I'm encouraging members of the LGBTQ community to get their identity documents in order. Um,
Right.
uh, Families, queer families, to make sure your parentage is in order. Like, for instance, a lot of people think, well, both parents' name are on the birth certificate, but depending on your state's laws, that doesn't necessarily make the person that didn't physically have the child, or if
Their
neither
parent.
parent physically had the child, it doesn't mean that you're a parent if there's not a genetic relationship there. And so you need to take those extra steps to either have a second parent adoption or step parent adoption. You need to have those extra steps. You need to have your will in line. You need to have your power of attorney in line, the person who's going to speak for you if you're not able to speak. We've seen that a lot in the
Right.
trans community, where a person didn't have that in place, and then they're dead named and misgendered in an obituary and all their services and stuff. And so these are the documents, the legal things that you can do now to provide some protection to your family later, making sure your beneficiaries are all in line with what your wishes are. So, in the queer community, a lot of times we have chosen family versus the family we're born
Right.
into, and just making sure you have all those things lined up. So those are just some steps people can do now to get that stuff in order.
You see it, to me, I see it if you already have these steps in place. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of see it harder in them being able to roll it back, whereas it's easier for them to put something in place that says going forward from this date, we will no longer allow this. Kind of like what they did with North Carolina schools last year, where they said after October 15th, if your child wants to go by a nickname of any sort, change their pronouns, you have to get the parents have to be notified of it first. And
Mm-hmm.
they put that in as of October 15th. So as long as you changed it before then, because my stepdad was a teacher in Wake County, so as long as you'd done it before that point in time at the beginning of the school year, they didn't have to report it to the parents. And if that had been given, say, at a freshman level, that entering ninth grader, then because it had already been
Mm-hmm.
established in their record, it could
Mm-hmm.
stay there throughout their next 4 years without their parents ever being contacted because it was done before that October 15th date.
Right.
And we know that teachers used to be a stopgap for
Mm-hmm.
child abuse. They were the ones that watched for children who seemed like they were either being abused or neglected within the classroom. They would go to the school counselor, who would then report this to social services, and it would be hunted down, searched out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now teachers are suddenly in North Carolina required to out the student when you don't necessarily know that they live in a supportive household. And you could actually be putting the child in more harm's way.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that Wake County schools put into, and I know this because of my stepdad, Wake County schools had put into place at least a stopgap that said if the child goes to the teacher and says, I want to go by a different name and different pronouns, the counselor calls the child down to the counselor's office and speaks with them first to let them know, do you understand that this means that your parents are going to be notified of this?
Mm-hmm.
So that if that's not a safety, if that's a safety issue, they can stop it right there, which at least helps a little bit. It was as much as they could do to try and protect the kids, because ultimately that's what teachers wanted to do, was protect the kids. And they're kind of
Mm-hmm.
being called out now, told you can't even do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, heck, for that matter, we as parents are being told we can't protect our kids.
Yeah.
We just have to accept the government tells us to accept.
Mm-hmm.
And I really don't care about the people who are in the comments. I want to go on and on and on about it, but that's the truth of the matter is
Yeah.
if you voted for the other people who were saying big government shouldn't rule people's lives, well, then you should be against this decision, because this is the government coming in and taking that choice away from parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Period.
And the thing is too, and what I hope people would take a moment and just think about is, my family is not dissimilar than most families, I assume. It's just me and my spouse. We're trying to make the best decisions, the most informed decisions that we can for our kids. I have a 17-year-old and a 20-year-old. So like we're, just like a lot of parents, we're worried about things like, okay, what's a suitable curfew for for our 17-year-old? Like what are we going to accept as good grades for her versus her sister? Like what I teased in the Newsweek article, I'm like, how much Chipotle's too much, because like she would go there every day if she could, like things like that. Like we're just like what I assume most other parents are. You're just dealing with the day-to-day stuff. Our child just happens to be transgender. It's like literally the least interesting thing about her. She's got so much other things that we could talk about that are really interesting and cool about her.
Right.
And I wouldn't want other parents of kids who aren't transgender to have any of this happening to them. Like, I think you should be able to make medically necessary decisions for your child along with your child and your healthcare professionals too. Like that, you should be
Right.
able to do that. So I'm not asking for anything special or different. I just want to be able to do what I think all parents should be able to do, which is to work with those medical and mental health professionals and my spouse and my child to come up with what is best for her in any situation. It could be the dentist, it could be her eye doctor, it could be,
Right.
whatever. And so, I don't think we're that different. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of that mis and disinformation that we talked about earlier strives to do, and what this sort of organized plan strives to do, is to really generate this divide by saying, like, we're totally different and foreign and alien to everybody else, and really we're not. We're
No,
two working parents trying to figure it out. We've got aging parents that are living with us now. Like, we're in the same
same.
boat. Yeah, like, we're trying. I can't afford eggs either, like, and again, I go back to my decisions for my child's healthcare do not impact you and your child, and you and
Right?
child's decisions on your child's healthcare, they don't impact me, and so I shouldn't have a say in that either. So, like, I think we're more similar than we are different.
I think we are. I think a lot of that division has created this lack of communication from
Mhm.
either side. When I went to school for my health advocacy degree, my thesis was on death with dignity.
Mhm.
And my dad had died of metastatic melanoma the year before. And it was really his battle was very short. My dad lived 5.5 months from the day of diagnosis to the day he died.
Wow.
And I had watched his parents both die, succumb to cancer battles that were 4.5 years long, each their battles. So by the time my dad had passed and they had passed, and I've gone back to school and I'm in health advocacy, and it's like, what do you pick for your thesis? And I was like, I don't want anybody else to have to go through this.
Mhm.
If you're given a terminal diagnosis, it's going to be horrific for you, and you don't want to go through that. I think it should be your right as a patient with your doctor to choose that, to choose how you want to go out.
Mhm.
Quantity of days does not equal quality of life.
Mhm.
I don't know that my father or my grandparents would have ever chosen those methods, right? I don't know that they would have chosen death with dignity. My dad was on hospice 1 week. 1 week. That's how
Mhm.
fast he went downhill. But I for myself, if that time comes for me, I want that option to choose.
Mhm.
I don't want my family members taking care of me for 6 months, 4 years, 10 years, depending on the illness that I have. And when I put that forward, like, I had people within my class who were like, I can't believe you're doing death with dignity. Like, that's horrific. And I have a lot of people who are religious within my family who are like, how can you be for this? And I'm like, I'm not for suffering. It's not about ending someone's life. It's about
Mhm.
ending their agony. And I had watched a grandparent turn into a 6-year-old and plead for water the last 6 months of his life that he couldn't have,
Mhm.
and beg for his mother, and didn't know who anybody was. And he had a bad heart. And all of us family members prayed his heart would go. So his battle, his agony, his suffering would end.
Mhm.
And that wasn't so that I think that people can just take their family members out.
Right.
That's for you. And again, I don't know that my grandparents would have chosen that. But I
Mhm.
want that choice so that for the people who would want it, it's there. And that's the same thing with trans affirming care.
Mhm.
You may not need it, but why should it be denied to someone who does? It's
Mhm.
still life-saving care that they need. And I think when we start picking and choosing what other people need, we've lost we've lost the big picture.
Yeah. And I think your example with the death with dignity also brings up a good point that, and I think mostly since 2016, and I would say other marginalized communities would say this has been ongoing, is just like we fail to see the humanity in people anymore. We only see people as an issue, which I'm sure is what might be happening in the comment section, is they don't people aren't seeing me as a person. You're not seeing me as a parent, as a mother,
Right?
who loves my child so much that I was willing to go into 6 figures of student loan debt to become an attorney.
Right?
We don't see the humanity in the opposition anymore. We've become so issue focused that we're willing to treat people as an issue versus treating people with dignity and respect. And
Right?
I think that's a tragic loss in our society and our culture, and I hope that eventually we can come back to that, and stop seeing people as an issue. It's like, this the what's happened with that CEO, the United Healthcare CEOs kind of galvanized both sides, to be like in agreement on a lot of things, and it's similar to that. Like, we're all in this together. We're all in. It's not a single issue. I'm a person, and you all are people. People are, and we have to do better by each other.
Well, I think that, and that goes back to that human element. Like, we're all
Mhm.
human beings. And I think we actually discussed this with Jenni, or with Jenni and Michael, Dr. Stennett, last weekend. Like, where did we lose our humanity? When did we
Mhm.
start treating people like human beings? And it's like, now we need to go back and remind people, hey, you remember that trans people are human, right? We've gone back to that again. I thought
Mhm.
we passed this level, and no, we're circling back to this. And I
Mhm.
do think that it's a shame, because again, when I look at my children, when I bore them into this world, I did not think this would be what was the downfall, like, going ahead, that this was the world that they were in. I can tell you, right now, all three of my children don't want to have children, because they don't know what they would be bringing their children into.
Mhm.
And honestly, looking at what's going on within the US right now, and honestly across the globe, I kind of see their point.
Right.
'Cause I didn't realize that this is what we would be looking at. And I want to acknowledge Annie, who's one of our, he comes to quite often. He's like, I feared you've been replaced with a Jennifer, Jenny. Um, Hallie is one of her children that she's brought into her home. It's a trans person that they didn't have a supportive home, and so Jenny brought them into her home, and
Mhm.
so they've got an issue, and she was running to urgent care. She actually messaged me, so that's why she's not here. Actually, is she ran to urgent care, but so I wanted to acknowledge Annie in that comment. But yeah, like, I did ignore, and that's who Jenny Does Crime. That is actually her on YouTube, kind of fighting back against the language in the comments.
Mhm.
I will have fun on YouTube when I'm done here, going in and shutting down and reporting all of you. So have fun with that. Um, and I get that people have different opinions. I understand that a lot of people don't have a perception of this because they don't have someone they know in their life.
Mhm.
And a
Mhm.
lot of times it takes knowing someone to change your perspective. My
Exactly.
mother, when she found out about my son, actually, I went over and told both my parents, and my stepdad was immediately, because again, a teacher, was like, what name, what pronouns?
Mhm.
Immediately.
Mhm.
And my mother looked at me and was like, hell no. And I was like, well, you won't have any communication with him until you figure this out on your own.
Mhm. Mhm.
And did. And it took my mother probably a year to come around. And
Right.
then about a year after that, one of her friends started telling her about two of her grandchildren, that she was like, I don't agree with what they're doing. I don't know how they live their lives. I don't understand
Mhm.
what's going on. And my mom's like, well, what's going on? And one was non-binary and one was trans.
Mhm.
And my mother's like, let me tell you about my grandson. And what she finally told them was pretty much what I told her from the get-go. It was not my job to tell my child how to live their lives. My
Mhm.
job is to raise my child, to love
Mm.
my child, and support my child, and
Yep.
whatever that is. And that's exactly what I do. And that's exactly what she told her friend. And now her friend has two grandchildren that she accepts,
Mhm.
didn't
Yeah.
before. And
Yeah.
it just took knowing and having that little perspective, which is why Jenni and I started the podcast, was kind of like,
Mhm.
let's have these conversations, because the problem is we're not speaking to one another. It's
Mhm.
like Donald Bravo and Apocalypse and Nikki in the comments. You want to talk at people, not to people.
Mhm.
We actually have
Mhm.
to have a conversation back and forth. It takes two sides, not just
Mhm.
screaming one's opinion at one person and thinking that everybody's going to resonate with your opinion.
Mhm. Yeah.
I understand that people believe that trans people, they're against it, and I'll throw it up here. This is, do I have it up here? I don't have it up here. I used to have a banner up here that said, "Your opinion is not my kid's fact.
Mhm.
No opinion changes my kid's fact.
Mhm.
His fact is he's transgender. That's
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
Nobody changes that. That's his choice.
Yeah.
Period. We
And
should all get
that
that."
that goes back to that humanity piece. We don't see the humanity in each other either. That, um, the idea that you have to either have personal experience with something to understand it. I do believe that is really impactful, especially for trans youth. If you know trans youth, that goes a long way. But like, I don't need to know. Like, I grew up in a military town. I didn't have to be in the Army to be able to be empathetic to um, military spouses who had a
Right.
deployed spouse for a year. Like, I could jump in and be part of their community and bring a meal or babysit kids, or I don't have to have cancer to be empathetic to a cancer survivor or someone who's going through cancer treatment. um, you know that's just basic humanity. That's just treating humanity with dignity and respect. And I don't have to be in that boat to be able to be empathetic and kind. And I'm not going to debate. Like, I'm not going to just say, well, I don't believe in cancer. I don't believe,
Right.
um, because that's not my reality, because I haven't ever had it. Or, I've never had phantom limb syndrome either. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen to some people. So,
Right.
again, that's just a general tenet, and being a good human is that dignity and respect. And I would say, until most recently, people have been living their lives with trans people in their community without any issue. You've been going to the bathroom with trans people, all this time, and not had a single problem. Your kid might have been in a school with a trans kid and not had a single problem. Like, it you don't have to have that personal knowledge to just be a good human to another person. It's okay.
Right. And I think that is where I feel like we've lost the most, is we just have lost the humanness, the
Mhm. Yeah.
compassion, the
Mhm.
empathy,
Yeah.
and the respect and dignity that everybody gets to
Mhm.
choose how they want to show up every day,
Mhm.
what work they want to do, how they want to be, who they want to be, how they want to live, who they love,
Mhm.
how they identify.
Yeah.
That's what we all each should be able to do.
Mhm.
And I think we've gotten to this place, at least in the US right now, where some people want to say, no, we all have to fit this or this box.
Mhm. Mhm.
And if
Yeah.
they were in those shoes, they wouldn't want somebody choosing a box for them.
Mhm.
And that's always kind of my, like, that stepping point. Would you want somebody to say you're something that you're not,
Right.
that you
Yeah.
feel some way that you don't?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
how am I don't live inside your body. How am I supposed to know what your lived experience is?
Right.
So why is it okay for you to try and put the same into my kid, to any
Yeah.
kid who's just trying to get by and grow up?
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
childhood, teenagers, puberty.
Yeah.
Puberty is a nightmare for any single person on the planet.
Mhm.
Add not being able to fit in your own skin, an incongruence with your own skin. I
Mhm.
can't myself imagine that.
Yeah.
But I have empathy for the people that do, and I
Mhm.
certainly would want them to get the help that they need and wouldn't
Yeah.
prevent them from that.
Yeah. And that's it. That also brings up, like, the people that are in the comments, or the people that I've been at the General Assembly, um and heard just horrible things said about
Right?
my child and things like that. Like, I worry about those people. Like, what's happening in your life and your mental health, that it's okay for you to attack children this way? Or, like, how is that how you want to show up in the world? Like, how are you saying things about me and my family? How is that going to benefit you in your life? Like,
Right?
I worry about people that, like, what does that say about the mental health of our country, that it's become okay to just blast youth out,
Hate.
so yeah, on social media, just and how does that fit in, especially for the folks who were at, and I haven't been looking at the comments, so I don't know, but the comments about religion and things like that. How do you show up as a follower of any deity, and in my case, like, how do you show up as a follower of Jesus and then say these really hurtful and hateful things to people? Like,
Hateful things.
that is not the Jesus that I know and follow. And it just makes me worried about those people. Like, I hope that they find the help and support that they need in their lives to show up in a better way, for all of us and for themselves.
Right? And to be
Mhm,
able to honestly deal with this. This isn't going away. Our
mhm.
children aren't going away.
Yeah. I mean,
Trans
yeah.
people aren't going away to make the
Yeah.
people who aren't trans feel better. That's not
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
Um, we're not putting our children back in boxes. We're not shoving our kids back in closets to make other people feel
Mhm.
comfortable. That
Exactly.
was an old way back, and we're not doing that anymore.
Mhm.
We love our children, and we're going to show up for our kids, and we're going to support our
Mhm.
kids, and whatever shape that looks like. And if other people don't agree with it, you don't agree with it.
Mhm.
That's your opinion. You can have that. That's fine.
Yeah.
Mine is I'm supporting and loving my kid.
Mhm.
So with that, I know Katie has somewhere she has to be at 8 o'clock, a hard stop. So I'm going to go ahead and close us out. Thank you so much for coming. Annie, thank you for your lovely comments. Jenny, thank you for fighting the good fight in the comments on YouTube. I will be, and I hope Hallie is doing better, whatever's going on with her. And so yeah, I just thank you so much for coming, for sharing your experience with us. I loved the fact that you were out there speaking the Skrmetti. I've had some opportunities to speak, but I always feel like it's I'm a parent and I'm an advocate. So there are certain avenues that I feel very comfortable speaking from, and then other ones that I don't. And I was like,
Mhm.
you know what? I've got somebody in legal aid. Let's get her on to get her opinion. And then you popped up on Newsweek, and I was like, no, now I definitely have to have her come on. We have got to discuss this. So thank you so much. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your advocacy, for your heart. And I hope parents can take away strength from both of us and Jenny, and the fact that we show up for our kids, and
Mhm.
it may be taking a job that even looks like fighting so that
Mhm.
your kid can have the life that they desire. But
Yeah.
I just argue that's what we're supposed to do as parents.
That's right.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's about
Thank
love.
you. Yeah, it is. And thank you so much for having me, for inviting me. Thank you to you and to Jenny for everything you all are doing. And
You're welcome.
I hope the Jenny's other bonus kid is okay. And but thank you. And I'd be happy to, anytime. And I appreciate all the work and
Awesome.
advocacy you all are doing. And I'm grateful that you're now part of my community as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. All right, guys, with that, we're going to go. Jenny and I are planning on having next week, we're going to be talking about how to navigate the holidays, whether it be at work, whether it be with your family, with your community, going into different events with your kids, and being prepared for what you might receive. So with that, stay tuned for Transparency next week. Thank y'all. We'll see you next week. Bye.